My name is Miller Files. I have worked missing persons cases for most of my career. Some disappearances are loud. Sirens, media, urgency. Others happen quietly. So quietly that by the time anyone notices the silence, it has already swallowed the truth. Relisha Rudd belonged to the second kind. Washington, D.C. is a city that never truly sleeps. Lights stay on. Cameras keep rolling. People keep moving. It is a city built to watch itself, and yet in this city, a child vanished without a single alarm. Relisha Rudd was 8 years old. She lived not in a house, but in a shelter, a temporary place that became permanent for families who had nowhere else to go. Crowded hallways, shared bathrooms, thin walls, a place where privacy disappears and oversight is assumed but rarely delivered. Relisha went to school like any other child. Teachers knew her name. Classmates recognized her smile. She was not invisible. Until she was. In early 2014, her absences began to accumulate. At first a day, then another, then several in a row. The school asked questions. Answers came back quickly. Relisha was sick. Relisha was seeing a doctor. Relisha would return soon. Paperwork arrived. Medical notes, signatures, official-looking language, enough to satisfy policy, not enough to save a life. No one called the hospital. No one confirmed the doctor existed. No one went to the shelter to physically see the child. This is the moment every investigation circles back to, the moment when intervention could have changed everything. At the shelter, there was a man named Khalil Tatum. He worked maintenance. He fixed doors, replaced light bulbs, moved freely through the building. To the family, he was more than staff. He was helpful, confident, calm. He said he was a doctor. He said he knew how to help Relisha. In environments like shelters, trust is currency. When resources are limited and fear is constant, certainty feels like safety. Relisha went with him, to appointments, to places adults said were meant to help her. No one asked why a maintenance worker was transporting a child. No one asked for credentials. No one stopped them at the door. The last confirmed sighting of Relisha Rudd came from a hotel security camera. She walked beside Tatum, her posture relaxed. No visible distress, no resistance. That image has been studied endlessly, frame by frame, not for what it shows, but for what it does not. After that moment, Relisha vanished. Days passed, then weeks. No school attendance, no shelter sightings, no reports. A month went by before police were notified. In missing child investigations, time is oxygen. Without it, evidence suffocates. By the time law enforcement focused on Khalil Tatum, the story darkened rapidly. He had murdered his wife. Then he took his own life. He left no confession, no explanation, no location. He took the answers with him. Relisha Rudd was never found. In this first chapter, the facts are simple and devastating. A child trusted adults. Adults trusted a stranger. Systems trusted paperwork. And a city lost a child. This is where the documentary begins, not with a crime scene, but with silence. When a child disappears, investigators are trained to ask one question before all others. Who was the last person to see them alive? In the case of Relisha Rudd, the answer came quickly, too quickly, and that answer carried a weight that bent the entire investigation around it. Khalil Tatum. He was not a stranger in the traditional sense. He did not appear suddenly and vanish. He was present, familiar, accepted. That is what made him dangerous. Tatum worked maintenance at the shelter where Relisha lived, a job that granted him access without suspicion, keys, hallways, trust. He moved through the building like part of its structure. To the adults around Relisha, he projected confidence. He spoke calmly. He explained things with certainty. He did not hesitate when questioned. This is an important detail. Predators who succeed rarely look nervous. They look helpful. Tatum told the family he was a doctor, not loudly, not dramatically, just as a fact. In communities under constant stress, people do not verify comfort. They cling to it. Relisha's family believed him. They allowed him to take her to appointments. They believed the paperwork he provided. They believed because disbelief required energy they did not have. As investigators, we reviewed those medical notes later. They were crude, misspellings, incorrect formatting, enough to raise alarms in hindsight. But hindsight does not save children. What matters is that for weeks, Khalil Tatum had unsupervised access to an 8-year-old girl. He transported her. He isolated her. He controlled the narrative of her whereabouts. By the time law enforcement examined his movements, the trail was already thinning. Security footage placed him with Relisha at a hotel. A neutral location, not a hospital, not a clinic. Hotels are places people use when they do not want to be seen returning home. Investigators tracked purchases made by Tatum, items that did not align with routine maintenance work, supplies that suggested preparation, not care. Then the investigation collided with a second crime. Tatum murdered his wife. Domestic violence is often treated as separate from crimes against children. In reality, they are frequently connected by the same psychology: control, escalation, ownership. When Tatum took his own life, he sealed the case shut without answering the most important question. Where is Relisha? In cases like this, we look for patterns. We look for past behavior. We look for cracks. What emerged was a man who lived a double existence. Helpful employee by day, isolated controller by night. He was not a mastermind. He did not execute a complex plan. He exploited opportunity and silence. Relisha disappeared not because he was brilliant. She disappeared because no one was watching closely enough. Search teams scoured parks, rivers, construction sites, abandoned buildings. Washington, D.C. has countless places where something can be hidden forever. No trace was found. For investigators, this absence speaks loudly. It suggests finality. It suggests intention. Most missing children leave something behind: a shoe, a witness, a moment of panic. Relisha left none of that, which tells us something terrible. She trusted the person she was with until the very end. In this chapter, the case narrows from a citywide failure to one man's actions. But it also reveals a deeper truth. Tatum did not act in isolation. He acted in the gaps left by systems that assumed someone else was paying attention. In the next phase of this investigation, we stop following the suspect and start following the silence that allowed him to operate. Every investigation eventually reaches a point where the suspect no longer matters. The trail ends. The evidence dries up, and the only thing left to examine is the environment that allowed the crime to happen. This is that point. Relisha Rudd did not disappear because one man was evil. She disappeared because multiple systems failed in sequence, each failure small on its own, together fatal. The school system was the first line of defense. Teachers noticed her absence. Administrators recorded it. Protocols were followed on paper, but procedures without verification are just rituals. No one insisted on seeing Relisha in person. No welfare check was triggered. The assumption was that someone else had confirmed her safety. The shelter system was the second line. Staff saw Relisha regularly before she vanished. They knew Khalil Tatum. They saw him escort her out. In a facility built on constant turnover, familiarity becomes authority. When someone is always present, they stop being questioned. No one documented where Relisha was going. No one confirmed when she returned. Children moved in and out every day. Disappearance became routine. Then there were social services. Reports were incomplete. Follow-ups delayed. Caseloads overwhelming. In systems under pressure, absence does not always register as danger. It registers as paperwork that will be addressed later. Later never came. By the time police were notified, the case had already slipped into the most difficult category. Delayed missing child. Witness memories faded. Security footage overwritten. Routine records erased by time. The investigation began not with urgency, but with reconstruction, trying to rebuild a timeline from fragments. This is where cases are often lost. Search operations expanded. Helicopters, K-9 units, volunteers. The city mobilized. But mobilization after silence is not the same as prevention. Every search location told the same story. Too much ground, too little information. The absence of physical evidence forced investigators into probability rather than proof. Statistically, children missing under these conditions rarely return alive. Emotionally, investigators never stop hoping. Public attention surged briefly, then waned. Media cycles move on. New tragedies replace old ones, but the file remains. Inside that file is a photograph of Relisha smiling, not a victim, just a child. The longer a case remains open, the more it transforms. It stops being about finding someone. It becomes about explaining how no one noticed. Relisha's case forced uncomfortable questions. How many children live unseen? How many rely on systems that assume safety rather than confirm it? This episode is not about a suspect. It is about absence as a warning sign. A missing child is not always taken. Sometimes they are simply not looked for soon enough. In the next chapter, we confront what happens when hope collides with reality. When investigators must prepare families for answers that may never come. There is a moment in every long-term investigation when the tone changes. It does not happen loudly. There is no announcement. It happens quietly in briefing rooms and late-night conversations. This is the moment when investigators stop asking when and begin asking if. In the Relisha Rudd case, that moment came after months of searching. Leads were exhausted. Witnesses had nothing new to offer. The suspect was dead. What remained was hope. And hope is a fragile thing in missing child cases. Families cling to it because the alternative is unbearable. Investigators guard it carefully because taking it away feels like causing harm. But reality has weight, and eventually it presses down. Search efforts scaled back, not because anyone stopped caring, but because resources must follow probability. This is one of the cruel truths of law enforcement. Attention is finite. Time moves forward, whether a case is solved or not. Relisha's family was told what investigators could say. There was no evidence of life after the last sighting. There was no credible theory of relocation. There was no communication. These conversations are never recorded, but they are some of the hardest parts of the job. As a detective, you learn to speak in careful language. You never say never. You never say dead. But your eyes give away what your words avoid. Public interest continued to decline. Posters came down. New stories replaced old ones. Relisha's name slowly slipped out of headlines. Inside the department, the case remained open. Cold, but not closed. This distinction matters. Closed means answered. Cold means waiting. Years passed. Investigators revisited the file periodically, looking for missed connections, advances in technology, new tips. Nothing changed the core reality. The man most likely responsible was gone. The child was not found. At some point, every investigator confronts the limits of their power. We can search, we can question, we can analyze, but we cannot force the past to speak. What lingers in cases like this is not failure, it is unease. The sense that a child slipped through fingers that were meant to protect. Relisha Rudd became more than a missing person. She became a symbol of children living on the margins, a symbol of systems that react instead of prevent, a symbol of silence. Hope does not disappear all at once. It thins, it becomes quieter. And yet, it never fully dies. Because somewhere in every investigator's mind, there is always the same thought. What if? In the final chapter, we will confront what this case leaves behind. Not answers, but lessons. There are cases that end with arrests, cases that end with trials, cases that end with sentences read aloud in courtrooms. And then there are cases like this one. No handcuffs, no verdict, no closure, only a name that continues to exist inside a file. Relisha Rudd. As years pass, missing child cases undergo a quiet transformation. They move from active investigations to institutional memory. They become reference points. Examples used in training rooms and policy discussions. Relisha's case changed procedures in Washington, D.C. Schools tightened absence reporting. Shelters adjusted supervision rules. Agencies improved communication pathways. These changes matter, but they arrive too late for one child. In law enforcement, we measure success in prevention as much as resolution. Every rule rewritten is an admission of past failure. Relisha Rudd's disappearance forced institutions to confront an uncomfortable truth. Systems do not fail dramatically, they fail incrementally. One assumption at a time. A teacher assumes paperwork is valid. A shelter assumes a familiar face is trustworthy. An agency assumes another department is handling it. And between those assumptions, a child disappears. What haunts investigators is not what we know. It is what we cannot know. Where Relisha went, what she felt, whether she realized she was in danger. These questions have no answers. And they never will. But memory is a form of justice. It does not punish the guilty. It does not restore what was lost. But it resists erasure. Every time Relisha's name is spoken, the silence that surrounded her disappearance is broken. That is why cases like this must be told again and again. Not as entertainment, not as spectacle, but as warning. A missing child does not vanish in an instant. They fade. They are overlooked. They are assumed safe until they are not. I have learned that the most dangerous word in any investigation is assumed. Relisha Rudd reminds us that vigilance is not optional, that protection requires presence, that systems must verify, not trust. Her story does not end with a resolution. It ends with responsibility. Responsibility carried by institutions, by professionals, by communities, and by anyone who hears her name and chooses not to forget it. I am Miller Files. This file remains open, because somewhere between memory and silence is the only place justice can still exist.